I also wanted to thank our podcast sponsor, Expression Australia, for providing our Auslan interpretations on our YouTube channel for every episode of the Pod Plays. Thank you so much. Expression Australia does incredible work for the deaf and hard of hearing community, and you can link in with them via my show notes. Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Pod Place. I don't even know what episode I'm at. I think it's episode 9. But it's just wild to think we're almost at 10 episodes. And this, yeah, it's just crazy. Craziness. I say this at the start, I swear, of every podcast, but I really am pretty blown away that I've been able to sustain this through all the other work going on and the mental load of my life. But it is such a passionate area that I want to continue to build and grow. And I think that this is such a vehicle for change in the conversations we're having. And I've just had so many of you reaching out and letting me know that it's really helped you along the way. And that just honestly is all I need. Even if this podcast were to help one person, that would be enough, because I just think there's just such power in that. And yeah, I really love just being able to give you all this insight from my experience, but also so many different stories across the world. And at the moment, I've only interviewed mums in Australia, but I do plan to interview other people abroad. I've got a long running list of parents who are really keen to get on the podcast and share their stories. So many really exciting and beautiful stories to share. Very, very, very pumped for that. But today, guys, is another solo episode. Just me. My husband is a superstar and has taken the boys out this morning because there was literally, I just don't have any time at the moment. I know how many people can resonate with that. Working in your own business when you have young children and trying to navigate your work hours, particularly over the holiday season, is pretty wild, and it's not easy. When I used to work in schools, things were very clear cut. And in some ways I miss that routine for sure, but I am such a flexible, fly by the seat of my pants sort of person. So this does work for me more, and I just need to navigate the schedule and mental load of all of it. But he's taken the boys out, so I thought I would take this opportunity to record this episode, because this one is something I'm really, really proud of. And it's about my deaf son, Frank, and something that he has been doing over probably the last year. So he is nearly 4. He is 4 in February. But he has been doing this since he was 3. And it's when he first did it, it really just took me back. It took me aback. Like, I was just so proud and just so amazed that he did this. And I think particularly just knowing the stories of deaf and hard of hearing adults who I've spoken to, and just seeing the kids that come through and that have come through the school that I've been working at, and just like really understanding their experiences and how it, I guess, relates to my son, it's just been really powerful. And I know I'm so privileged to have so many stories and experiences under my belt that I can really draw from to support my son. But it can also be a burden in some ways in my mind, because I know too much. And I think I talk about this a lot with my clients, but it's really wonderful that I have all this knowledge, that I had all this knowledge before Frankie was born, that I could really implement and apply into our life. But there's also an element that it really terrifies me, the future for my son, because I've just seen how wrong it can go, and how a lot of these systems that are set up to support our kids are actually not doing that. And it's really, really hard for me to release some of that control and allow things to sort of happen how they happen to an extent, because I think it's important for my boy to navigate hardship and adversity and challenges and barriers that arise. But I also find it really hard to let that happen all the time. And there's a part of me that just wants to wrap him up and protect him from everything. And I know so many of you can relate to that. And that's definitely a mother thing in general, or a parent thing in general, that we just want to protect our children. But there definitely is an added layer when your child is or has been born into a world that has not been designed for them. It's not accessible, automatically accessible to them. And with that comes a lot of challenges. So that is why I'm so pumped that Frank started doing this, because it's something that I really wanted to instill in him early, is this idea of being an advocate for himself, being a self-advocate, a really strong self-advocate. And self-advocacy skills are so critical for our deaf kids, particularly as they hit school and they move into scenarios where there isn't that person in their corner ready to jump and advocate and have that conversation, and actually it's up to them to do that. And I always say building those skills early is so crucial for these kids, because it just means when those scenarios and events pop up, they're ready to go. I've just seen way too many deaf students and deaf youth in scenarios where they have sat there and not said anything, not raised awareness to the fact that they are struggling, or that they're missing things. And for a whole year, like, I think about school all the time, and I remember having a hard of hearing a girl that I didn't know her very well, and I came into the school or the class with her, and it had been 6 months or something, and I'd only really started working with her, and she had no idea what was happening in that room. And she had no idea that she had the right to advocate for herself. And it just, it hits the heart, because I think unless they do it themselves, people are going to allow them to slip under the radar a lot of the time. And we just need our kids, in a respectful way, but in an assertive way, to be able to advocate for themselves and their rights. And so this is why I'm so excited about this habit that my deaf son has started doing about a year ago. Which is early, but if you guys know Frankie from my socials, he does everything early, and definitely on his own timeline, and this is no different. So the habit that he is doing at the moment is that, about a year ago, he started doing this, where he would be in a conversation with people, and particularly around extended family, or just a big group of people, or even just like a smaller multi-speaker conversation. And he would stop the conversation and wave and ask us, "What are you talking about?" And he would do this in Auslan. And I remember the first time it happened, we were talking, I was signing, but the rest of the group were not. So I was just signing because it's very habitual for me to do that now. But he came up and he tapped me quite aggressively and said, "What are you talking about?" And I looked at him and I thought, wow, oh my goodness, this is happening now. Like, he's 3 and this is happening. And of course, I didn't tell him. It doesn't matter. I didn't tell him. Never mind. And I didn't tell him. I'd tell him later. I told him right then and there what we were talking about, to the best of my ability. It was a very complex conversation and an adult conversation, so a lot of it would have gone over his head. But that doesn't mean he doesn't get to have access to it. Right? A lot of people might think, well, this is a conversation between me and this adult, and he doesn't need to know. But if his hearing sibling who is sitting there has access to that conversation and can hear that conversation, then the deaf child has a right to have that conversation. And if we don't unpack this with them, then they are missing more and more of that incidental language and incidental learning that is so critical for their theory of mind, for their vocab development, for their language development. And so, I remember he started doing this, and it was wild, because it really shifted so much for me as a mum, but also I just started to see him in this new light, and I was so proud of him. And yes, he has done it at times where it has made other people feel uncomfortable, family, friends who don't sign, and he's gone up to them and said, "What are you talking about?" And it's that awkward, "Oh gosh, I don't know how to unpack this, and I will always help in that situation if I can. But I think the biggest thing is family, friends, whoever, no one says, oh, no, I'm not going to tell you, or no one ever says to him, never mind, it's boring, don't worry. They know, because of the expectation we've set so early, that they, in whatever way, need to let him know what they're talking about. Whether that's through sign, whether that's through drawing a picture, whether that's through, writing words down, through showing a video, like however we need to actually unpack that with him, we are doing that. So he knows that he has a right to access that conversation. And that's why I guess I'm so proud of him. Well, number one, it showed me that cognitively he's really understanding that he is missing conversations, that that there are things happening around him. People are moving their mouths and talking, and he's missing it. And he knows that that has meaning. He knows that whatever's happening between that dialogue that's happening in front of him, that has meaning, and he wants to know what that meaning is. That was really a proud moment for me, because I thought, wow, he's really getting that. And he's really started to, in the last 6 months, understand that he is deaf, and that when he'll walk into a room, like it could be a really big group of people and they're all chatting and talking, and he will just look around and then he'll sign all hearing. Like he knows straight away, oh yeah, they're all moving their mouths, they're all talking, they're all hearing. And that's a very like black and white view for him. So it comes again with deafness, like if people don't have devices, he's still not really understanding that they can still be deaf. So he's like, no, they have to have a hearing aid, or they have to have a cochlear implant. They can't just be there without devices. So we're working on that at the moment, but he's definitely starting to see the difference between the deaf and hearing sort of identities. And this is a huge part of that, understanding that he's missing these conversations. A lot earlier than I thought this would happen. I was sort of expecting this to start happening when he hit school, but no, he likes to do things when he likes to do things. And I was and am so incredibly proud of him for really having the confidence and feeling comfortable enough to just, call it out and say, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. And it's funny, he'll still do it though. I remember I was having a conversation with his deaf mentor the other day, and we were both signing, voice of signing, and he's waved at her and said, what are you talking about? And she looked at him and she signed it beautifully, unpacked it with him. But I thought he's just gotten to such a habit of asking, and he obviously wasn't following our conversation enough to, he was sort of looking down, playing a game, and then looking up. So he wanted to know. And so it goes in both ways, it's all about him having that access. Which he deserves, which all our deaf and hard of hearing children deserve, right? And so, I'm just so proud of him for that. And it's something that I really encourage people to start setting that expectation around, where if the deaf child's even giving you a curious look or a confused look, like they're not sure what's happening, that is an opportunity for you to go, oh, I'll unpack this for you. Oh, yeah, you deserve access to this. Because the more we do that, the more we make particularly group gatherings or multi-speaker sort of scenarios accessible for our deaf kids, the more they'll expect it, and the more they will ask for it, and the more they will advocate for it, which is really important. And this again comes back to sort of particularly in school and their education. We want them to be really understanding that they have that right. And that's a huge thing for Frank, is that there is that expectation that has been set. Now that bar has been set, that he expects to know what's being spoken about. He expects to know what's being signed about. And he will go, not just to me, but he will go to anyone in that group and ask them. And I think that that's so powerful, so powerful, and has just really laid this beautiful foundation for future self-advocacy skills. And I always say, it can, as they get older, we just want to make sure that we're ensuring that they are still being respectful around that advocacy, because we know, and I did a lot of education around this when I worked in high schools with our deaf kids, in obviously collaboration with a deaf adult, but it was around this, how do we advocate the right way for our needs and our rights? And it's all around teaching them those skills in a way that's going to get them what they need in a respectful way, but also standing their ground and being assertive as well. And I think that just seeing Frank having that confidence now and being really assertive and self-advocating for himself and he's not even 4, I mean, it's terrifying. It's a little bit terrifying to see who he's going to be in the next couple of years. But I hope that with our support and his village around him, that we can really hone those skills to be effective, and so that he can go out there and really use them to support him in this big, wide world. There are so many things, so many skills just like this that we can be laying down early. I always get the question from families, or is it too early to? Well, is it too early for us to? And my whole rule of thumb with that is no, it's never too early. It's never too early to teach the big words. It's never too early to teach self-advocacy skills. It's never too early to get them an interpreter. Like, it's never too early. The earlier we do it, the better, because we want them to be really ready when they hit that school period and beyond that, well into the future. And so the earlier we can get these skills sort of and lay that foundation around these skills, the better off our children will be long term. And I guess I want to talk about why, particularly this habit that Frank has developed over the last year, why it's so important and why I believe it matters so much. And this is, again, from my perspective, being in this field of deaf ed and having conversations with deaf people and just seeing the detrimental effects of people not being inclusive and accessible and not providing that open communication with the deaf and hard of hearing cohort, and the real ramifications of that. And so one of the biggest things, and I'm not going to dive into this topic today because, again, I don't represent the deaf community in this space, and I haven't experienced this, but what these early self-advocacy skills do, and when we get these kids really requesting that they be involved in conversations and demanding access and demanding inclusion, is it breaks the dinner table syndrome cycle. It breaks it. And if you haven't heard of dinner table syndrome, I would invite you to go and research it, because it's something that the deaf community have really amplified, particularly over the last, it's been around obviously forever, but it's become, I guess, this name and this sort of concept over the last 10, 20 years. And it's around this idea that, the dinner table is this symbol of bonding and communication and connection with our family and our friends in our village. And so often deaf and hard of hearing people miss out on that experience. Even though they're there, even though they're present, they're a body at the table. It's, again, if we look back at one of my episodes around visitorship versus membership, it's like they're a visitor in their own village, right? They're not actively being drawn into these connections and these bonds and these conversations. And there's a really powerful video going around where a deaf adult actually breaks this down and talks about it. There's loads on YouTube, so just go for gold. But I'll see if I can find that video and chuck it in the show notes, because it really is powerful. But that is a huge reason why I'm so proud of Frank, because this really is going to break that for him and break this idea of him not being involved in these conversations, and that dinner table symbolism that we know, where we get together and we connect and we bond and we share stories and experiences. So it breaks that cycle. Another thing it does is it builds skills for future advocacy as he gets older, which I've spoken about, and particularly when he starts school. There are so many things that happen in schools, and you can have the most well-meaning teacher sometimes, right, who really does want to do the best by your child, but there may be lack of awareness, lack of training, and they might also just be under the pump all the time, right? They've got 30 other kids in the room, and they can't, or they don't have the capacity to be checking in with that child every 10 minutes, checking for understanding every 10 minutes, even though that should be what's happening. A lot of the time in reality, that isn't. And so sometimes it actually is up to the deaf child to speak up, to raise concerns, to say, hey, this isn't accessible. I remember once in a high school setting, there was a deaf child who they put on a YouTube video, YouTube captions. So much education having to be had around the auto captions on YouTube, because if you mute a lot of those videos and try to read the captions only, It's ridiculous. They do not match. So I remember a teacher was putting on a YouTube video that they thought would be really effective for the content that they were teaching in that lesson that day. And the deaf child, the minute they saw it was auto captions, they put their hand up and said, "I'm sorry, but that's not accessible. I can't understand those captions." And to the teacher's credit, this doesn't always happen, but to the teacher's credit, they said, "Oh, wow, okay, I didn't realize, I'm sorry." And they didn't play the video that day. They said, "Look, we'll play it tomorrow. I'll get the captions sorted and we'll play it tomorrow." Um, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes we have that they play it anyway, and it just, all that stuff sort of perpetuates that idea that the deaf child isn't valued because, well, I've got this video now, so you're just going to have to sit through it, even though you can't access it. So that happens a little bit. But I mean, the main point of that story is that the deaf child felt comfortable and confident enough in themselves and what their rights were to say, "Hey, this isn't accessible. Hey, I just need to let you know ABC." And I think that that's really important. And that's not being disrespectful. That's not being rude. A deaf child has every right to question accessibility in their education. It's not okay for them, or it's not okay for it to be expected that they just sit there because the teacher's always right and we don't want to disrespect the teacher, so we're just not going to say anything. That's not okay. And I think it has to be this really open understanding between the teacher and the deaf child, that the deaf child is there to support the teacher in understanding accessibility more. The teacher should know, but in the instances where the teacher may not, or they've missed something, the deaf child has the right to go, "Hey, this isn't accessible. Hey, this isn't actually going to work for me. This isn't inclusion." And the teacher needs to be able to take that on and go, "Okay, thank you for sharing. Let's see what we can do to change that." These conversations happen all the time in schools. When they're done right, they're done beautifully. And unfortunately, of course, we would love for our kids to go to school and never have to have that conversation, never have to go, "Hey, that's not accessible," never have to point out things that are happening within their environment. But the reality is they're going to have to. And we would much prefer our deaf kids to go be that deaf child that goes, "Hey, this isn't right," than the deaf child that sits there for a year in an inaccessible classroom and does not get anything out of their education. That is not okay. And that is failing our kids. So that is why this is so important. And I guess why I'm so stoked that Frank's doing this so early. Because it's those skills, and beyond school, employment, just being out in the world and having to have these conversations and educate people. The more they practice having those conversations and advocating for themselves, the better they're going to be, the better their skills are going to be. It's just all this ripple effect, right? Another, and the final one that I really wanted to talk about, and why this matters so much, is it's actually closer to home, is it really supports educating the family and friends around that deaf child. So when the deaf child is there advocating for themselves, it really sort of puts a bit of a I guess you could say it's a bit of a shock to the system for some family when this happens, but it's also a bit of a reminder. It's quite a reality check for a lot of family and friends when a young deaf child saying, "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. You need to tell me." It supports them in improving their communication with the deaf child because they have to problem solve. They have to go, "Right, okay, you want to know, I don't have all the sign right now to tell you, what else can I do? How else can I show you?" And it's just that really gentle reminder, and it builds the skills in the family and friends village as well, because the more it happens, the more they recognize that they have to be on their game because the deaf child is going to ask them what's happening. And that's happened a lot in our family over the last year. Now and again, Frank's happy not to sort of be involved in those bigger dialogues. He'll go and do his own thing with his cousins, or he'll be playing in the pool or whatever. But if we're at the dinner table, or the table particularly, he wants to know. And he won't just ask me, as I said, he'll ask anyone. And so they all need to be on their game. They all need to be ready to work out how they're going to communicate that to him. And it's not about perfection. And I say this constantly about everything, don't I, really? Because I don't live that way myself. And I just don't think anyone should be living that way. There's no such thing as perfection. But it's not about being perfect and unpacking it in the perfect way. It's more about the intent to unpack. It's more about going, "I'm going to give you the access in the best way I can because you deserve that. You are valued. You are entitled to that. you are important to me, so I want to do this for you. And I think that's what it comes down to, is the deaf child feeling valued, feeling seen, feeling like they belong, and feeling like they're not an afterthought or they're not an inconvenience. Because all those feelings are huge triggers for a lot of deaf and hard of hearing adults that I've spoken to. And no one should ever feel that way. No one should ever feel like they're an inconvenience to particularly their family and friends, but anyone, just for being who they are, right? Just for being the person that they are, that they were born as. Like this is wild to me. And I think I always think about how how so many people are bullied or, torn down for literally being the person they were born as. Like this is who they are. Like that's them. And so it makes it wild. It's wild to me that that happens, and it's wild to me that we allow that to continue happening. And that somehow the blame tends to be placed back on the deaf child. Like deaf child wasn't listening, or the deaf child wasn't looking at me, or the deaf child wasn't engaged. It's on them. It's not my fault. And I think we really need to get out of that mindset, and start to be more open to learning more and really listening and engaging with our deaf and hard of hearing kids when they're trying to tell us stuff, because they are living this experience and we are not. Like, oh my gosh, we are not. And it's always really important to remember that privilege as a hearing person, that as much as we want to understand our deaf child's experience, we won't. And we need to be really, like, we need to lean into that and be okay with that, but also be willing to learn from them. And oh man, I have learnt so much from Frank over the past 3 years. Like, and I've been working in the deaf ed field for 15 years, and my son has taught me things I never knew. And I just think that's a really important lesson, is that we are always learning, we're always growing. You have to always be a student in life. And I know that sounds a bit cliche, but it's true. You have to always be willing to learn more and not assume you know it all. Like, that is my whole thing, right? And I come into this business that I run and the work that I do very humbly and very in a way that I'm always learning. I am in no way a guru in this space. I am simply contributing to the conversation and trying to shift that narrative for our kids, because I'm passionate, wholly passionate about this, because my son is living it and I want his world and his future to look different to what so many deaf and hard of hearing kids have had to endure. And so together we can do that. And it starts, full circle, building these advocacy skills in our kids, and really getting them to understand their rights and what they're entitled to and what they should be asking for. And so, yeah, I'm really, really proud of my boy for getting there. And I think we can all encourage our kids to also do this and get to this point just by opening up that access and that expectation and raising that bar, where they always know that they are valued and that they have a seat at the table and that they belong. And because that's all we all want, right? That's all every human wants, is to feel connection and to feel that they belong to a community, to several communities, but just to feel that we have a place. So I hope this episode brought some aha moments, some little nuggets of wisdom. I just feel that Frank is, without even knowing it, is just changing the game for so many families just by being him. And I'm just so proud of him. And I am so proud of every parent and family member who is putting in the work for their deaf child, listening to these podcasts, doing the courses, reading the research. You guys are the real MVPs. You're incredible. And just keep fighting the good fight. I'm here alongside you, and I'll see you next week. I also wanted to thank